All right, Berto, it's Friday, and as promised, it is the end of the week of Berto, where we answer patron questions. Let's answer questions. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk and Humberto. I'm a therapist, and I'm also a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I solve Scooby-Doo style mysteries.
Annual patron Natasha from California, whom we've met in person.
Oh, yeah.
She says, "Hey, Kirk and Berto, hope you're doing well." Are you doing well, Berto?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Me too, thank you. I was listening to both of your feelings around angering the listeners, and I started thinking about how reading feedback as opposed to in-person feedback would make someone feel more insecure. I've been listening for a long time, so obviously I've disagreed with your take more than once, but if we were in a conversation, it would come off as more inviting than a posted comment about it on social media. So I wanted to know what you thought about that. What do you think about that, Berto?
Yeah. You know, do you remember when email first started coming out in the 90s?
Yeah.
And how no one knew how to use it, right? I think mostly people still don't know how to use it, but certainly when it first came out, it was like, okay, now I can communicate with someone typing this thing and pressing send.
Yeah, so just as a stark example, it would be 97 or something, and I was replying to a group email of like 30 different college friends, and I said something very personal that only me and the other guy knew about.
Oh.
And I went to bed, and it suddenly occurred to me that I might have replied all because I think that was a new function.
Sure.
And I worried, and I don't think at the time there was a way to check. You know, there wasn't a sent folder where you could see the log of exactly who. Because otherwise I would have just looked at that, you know.
Sure.
I had to wait until the next day and call people and say,
gosh.
"So did you get an email?" And they're like, "No." I was like, "Oh, okay, thank God." But yeah.
So I mean, that's horrible. That's a horrible feeling. Can totally relate. And what started happening is people would reply impulsively in very aggressive ways, in ways they would never do in person. And so it'd be like, and you know, it'd be like, well, I think this is complete BS, blah, blah, blah. I just totally disagree with this. Or even, you know, just even more personal insults or something. And they would just lob these, and I started seeing that. And I felt, you know, I did it too. I'm not saying I didn't do it. I did it as well. And it was just that because we were unnaturally finding a new way to communicate that where you didn't see the other side at all. So you're just typing words into a blank page, and you don't have that humanity connection. So yeah, I think that set it off in a direction where you see this in the comment sections of things. People are sort of either they're literally anonymous or they're virtually anonymous, and they just feel like, I don't know, it's just, I'm not really having an interaction with a human. I'm just typing in this thing or typing in my phone. And so people are not the same that they would be in person.
Yeah, I noticed this in cars when I would be driving around with a friend of mine from college who is very mild-mannered and very polite and very non-aggressive. He's one of the most aggressive, foul-mouthed people I've ever seen on the planet when he gets behind the wheel. Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about suppression of your anger, but I would wonder about that and think, at the very least, even if it is a suppression issue, what is it about being in a car that allows him to unleash like this? And the conclusion I came to, which is not a novel one, is that you feel like you are on a different planet from the person, or you're not even thinking there's a human being in the car. You've dehumanized them, or they're just an extension of the machine of the car, you know? And when we are, and I would often compare if the exact same thing had happened in the grocery store with, you know, grocery carts, you know, say it's a very minor, like 3 mile an hour issue at a stoplight. And then you translate that to you're coming around the corner in the produce aisle or something. And in person, you would never.
Can you imagine?
You would never flip someone off and tell them to go to hell. And
yeah, you're rounding, and the other person almost hits you. It doesn't really hit you. You both stop suddenly with your carts. No harm done. No broken bottles of milk, and you're like, "Fuck you!
Right.
You should go back to driving school, you asshole."
No one would ever do that, and it's because we, at the very least, don't want to have our face bashed in, but also. We have humanity. We care about other people, and we don't want to make them feel like shit. But somehow, you put a piece of glass between me and a piece of glass. There's two panes of glass between us. It's like all bets are off.
Let alone if you put an internet between you.
Right. I mean, God. Right. The other thing is there's more psychopaths, according to research on the internet. There are more. Of the comments. Of all the comments on the internet, there's a disproportionate amount of psychopaths for a number of reasons. But also what I found was that I'm totally fine with criticism or even someone hating me, hating my guts. The thing that I can't tolerate emotionally is the ability to, in the moment, reply. If someone were to, if you and I were doing a live show and someone, they wouldn't say they're not interrupting. Say we're taking a break and I walk away from the stage and someone from the audience comes up and just says, personally, I think this whole thing is stupid and boring. It would, maybe it'd get under my skin kind of, but in the moment I'd be like, it's not for everyone. And especially if they said, I didn't like that one thing you said, I'd be like, I could see that. Because I'm not precious about, but when someone...
and first of all, let's remember, they wouldn't have said it that way, right? Like they wouldn't have said like, this thing is stupid and boring.
But even if they did, is the point.
Yeah.
As a therapist, I'm trained to handle that kind of feedback. And I... take pride in my ability to say something. That a big part of the complaint process being emotionally satisfying to me is in the moment I reflect at the very least that I hear them. Someone says that was dumb or you're dumb, and I'd be like, okay, I hear you.
Fair
in
enough.
my head, I might be like, I disagree, but I don't even have to say that. That loop, that in the moment exchange is way more tolerable to me than someone saying something and I discover it the next day and there's all these upvotes and like comments, even if people are defending me. There's something about, maybe it triggers some kind of bullying incident where people were talking shit about me behind my back.
Sure.
I don't know. It feels completely more triggering. The way that it triggers my OCPD, and that it feels like there's this flaw that's like in the soup, and I can't get it out. It's just stuck in there forever. You know what I mean?
Oh, totally. I mean, like I've said before, there's a category of comments that never bothered me online for some reason. And it was this, let's say we did an episode or something and someone, which did happen. Who is this guy? I just want Dr. Honda, or worse, like that guy's annoying, right? Like those kinds of things.
That's my puppet account.
Perfect. Well, for some reason, those never bothered me because I always had a combination of either, well, it's your loss, or, yeah, I'm not for everyone. Move along, right? And I would usually actually try to troll them a bit. Like I'd respond like, oh, yeah, this guy's like the worst or whatever, right? I'd have a little fun with it. The ones that I absolutely did trigger me and did like lead to me spending an unreasonable amount of time obsessing over it are the ones where they fundamentally misrepresent something I said or a position I took, and then now
like what?
The one I always come back to is it was about Bill Cosby. There was that remember that movie or that documentary we reviewed where I was making the point that I had this feeling like the documentary was trying to minimize his comedic importance. And I disagreed with that because I was like, well, yeah, the guy's a monster. However, he was a huge comedian, blah, blah, something along these lines. And in the comment thread, it was like, can't believe he's defending Bill Cosby, blah, blah. And that kind of thing really upset me because I'm like, no, you are putting words in my mouth, completely misrepresenting my position. You don't know what you're talking. So it was that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And those don't
Same.
happen as often, but when they do, ugh.
Yeah, same. I guess I hadn't articulated that or thought of that's an internet thing where either someone will disingenuously, purposely misinterpret what you're saying or extend what you're saying, or they just misunderstood you, or they were triggered or something. And all, like, there's a chance that the individual that got that ball rolling had been sexually abused themselves or raped or something. And when you are watching the documentary or you're hearing people talk about it, and, it's sort of like, I'll say you come to me and you say that one of our other friends had sexually assaulted you and you're very traumatized by it. If I were in that moment to say, well, he has some good qualities,
Right.
But I recognize that he sexually traumatized you, which is completely wrong.
Right.
You'd be like, what the fuck? So, for some people that are listening to us talk, in their arc of recovery, they might be at a point where that's just not going to go over well. And so they extend that and they start typing like, I can't believe that he's defending, when 99.9% of people would not interpret it that way.
Right.
And so when people do that online, and sometimes they're right and I don't realize it, like I'll listen back to it and I'll be like, actually I kind of was saying that, or I could see how people would think I was saying that. But sometimes it's like you're saying, where did you listen to the 1.5 hours that we talked? 99% of the time, we were talking about this angle that Bill Cosby is a monster. If these allegations are accurate, which in all likelihood they are, since there's so many and they're very believable. And the triggering thing to me, the fly in the soup thing, is there will be people that will not listen to the episode and have no idea who I am. Right. And will read that comment or see that post on Reddit, and they're walking around in the world thinking that I'm not only just like a shitty podcaster, but I'm absolutely a monstrous human being. And in the grand scheme of things, it means nothing, because they're just going to go on with their day and live their life. And I'm sure I have misunderstandings. There's someone I think that's a monster in the public sphere that
you misunderstood,
right, and that person is not affected. But that's not tolerable to us humans. Even though logically I understand it comes with the territory, that's not a thing I've ever experienced in my personal life, where someone that experiences me is walking around with this idea that I am truly a monstrous human being. That emotionally is hard to sleep with.
Well, because our brain doesn't have systems of innately understanding the scale of the world and of 7 billion people and of the internet. So to us, it's still Joey down the street or down the hut in my tribe, and I might get kicked out of the tribe because now he's spreading rumors about me. So it's our brain doesn't, at some core raw level, doesn't quite have the distinguishing capability between those. So you're still threatened. You're still like, that one stranger that I'll never meet or ever see or hear from again says something incorrect about me. That's threatening my life.
Yeah. And you know what someone's typing furiously into the comment section right now?
What?
Berto is such an idiot because there's 8 billion people on the planet.
No. I live 4-dimensionally. Thank you very much. I'm still at 7.
So
people that
live 4-dimensionally, -1 from every number, is that?
No, I can pick which time frame I'm currently talking from.
Oh, okay.
Now listen, this thing, do you know who Destiny is? He's a streamer and YouTuber.
I've heard there's some kind of hubbub about him lately, right?
Yeah, but I'm not even going to go into that. Just that, funny enough, today I was listening to one of his streams, and he was talking about something similar where he was saying, look,
you rewind the clock 20 years and you say I was listening to one of his streams.
Yes.
Completely different meaning.
Totally different meaning. Oh, well, yeah, that's weird. So anyway, so I was listening to him pee live on Twitch, and but he says he was talking about something similar, where he was saying, look, imagine that I I'm being abused, like, abused by someone, and I'm trying to discuss that with a mutual acquaintance or something, and that person immediately starts kind of middle of the roading it, saying, well, I can see both sides and stuff. That's horrible. Like, that feeling is horrible. You feel so invalidated. It's that kind of thing where it's you're basically, the person has in that moment invalidated your experience. So to your point about the Bill Cosby thing, it's quite possible that even though I was just making a comment about how, yeah, technically speaking, Bill Cosby was this huge comedian, it might trigger someone because they're like, how dare you speak highly of this person?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess it's a parallel process with what I was saying in terms of the inability to respond. Like another experience that I've experienced in my parasocial relationships, podcasts that I listen to, if they don't like something, like TBTL, my favorite podcast here in Seattle, this was years ago, but they're a little younger than you, like maybe a couple years younger than you, and which is like 6 years younger than me or something. Mm-hmm. And they universally just hated Billy Joel. And they just thought Billy Joel was a joke and had no good songs, and he was super cringe. And
this is, by the way, Paul, our friend Paul.
Yeah, and it seemed almost kind of generational. I don't want to accuse people who graduated from high school in 1995 as hating Billy Joel, but for people, I'm right on the cusp of, like, my older brother and sister grew up with a lot of Billy Joel being top of the charts, with Glass Houses and Piano Man and all that stuff. And it was not considered to be cringe or cheesy. I think eventually he became cheesy and pretty quickly in the late 80s and the early 90s, which is maybe when they experienced it. Plus, like, the vibe, by the time you're in 1990...
He stopped putting new music out, and so the only thing you knew was that last bit of stuff he did.
Well, also, by the time you get to 1985, it's all Wu-Tang Clan and Snoop and stuff. Yeah. And you hear Uptown Girl with, like, a saxophone solo, and it just is antithetical to everything that you are. And so I think it's, I don't know, or it's just preference, who cares?
But it's also, no, I totally understand that. And it's also, like, for me, I actually only like the early.
But to hear that, stuff. But to hear, my point is sorry for, I just want to get this out, that to hear them go off on Billy Joel for like 25 minutes, brought me distress. Whereas if they were just there in the room dogging on Billy Joel, and I had the ability to say, well, he had some great songs in like 1983. There's some legit songs. And even if they said, liar, it was too brave. Even if they said that to me, then I'd be like, well, at least I'm in the room. There's a frustration with having a conversation that you care about go on, and you
can't do anything.
You can't do anything. It's just happening, and you can't chime in. So and I think
we can all relate as consumers and producers. We can all relate to that. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are listeners that have had that many, many times. And as a person who is on both sides of this coin, I ask you listeners who haven't been on our side of the coin to have some awareness of that emotion and try to regulate it, because that's what I do. Like when I'm listening to a podcast and I have that feeling, I'm like, oh wait, I'm having that thing where if I was on the other side of this coin, because it would be hurtful to for you and me to know if we were saying something that was not in line with the way someone else thought, and they're just slowly building up like hatred towards us. You know what I mean? Even if they never say anything to us, it just feels like, hey, if you were here and you were to say something, I'd listen to it. So I think we have to, similar to how we didn't know how to use email in the beginning, I think we all have to learn how to handle parasocial situations like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I had to extract myself from some channels that I used to follow because I was finding myself rage commenting because of that exact thing. Like they would have these episodes and I'd be like, what? Why are you going in these directions? And that frustration of like, you can't hear my voice. And so then I would rage comment like, this is ridiculous. And then I was like, okay, why am I subscribed to this channel? Let me just unsubscribe.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, is too bad because you might have, if you had a perspective that could get you through the storm, you might have still enjoyed that content,
Yeah. In this case, it was a long time of decline into what I considered only negativity. And I was like, you know what? This is not for me. Okay. But it took me a while to get there to be like, okay, I can't have these conversations directly with them. So why suffer?
Yeah. All right. Let's take a break. We get back. Let's read some more emails. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right. We're back from the break. Let's do an OPP, Berto.
OPP.
So these people are
easy as 1, 2, 3
on a list of patrons. I sorted all the patrons by those patrons who have contributed the most money over time. Not that that's the only
capitalist pig.
Not that that's the only measure of one's worth, but I just thought it was an interesting way to sort the list. And
I love it
because some people will become they'll move around on the tier list over time, sure. and even if you do that, if you're a patron for the past 9 years, then that contributing starts to pile up. So we've already named those at the top of the list, but to continue, we have Claire from God Knows Where. That rhymes. They've been a patron since 2020. We have Sine, who I believe I've communicated with from God Knows Where, who's only been a patron for the past year, Berto.
Whoa.
But because they're at, I think, the top level,
they're contributing a ton of money.
Yeah. We have Lemon from Moscow, Idaho. Ooh. They've been a patron since 2018. We have Liz, who we met in person at one of our live events from Michigan. Been a patron since our second month on Patreon in October of 2015. Yeah.
Oh my God.
We have Melanie from Sedona, Arizona, patron since 19.
Nice.
And good old Jessamy Flynn.
Oh, Jessamy.
We know well. She was a student of mine, and then a supervisee of mine, and then a colleague of mine, and then a friend of ours. And Berto, so this is, what do they call it? Kismet? Is that the word for it?
Yes.
It's a coincidence.
Call it fate. Call it karma.
Jessamy emailed me today. So in my timeline right now, recently I published an episode called Dr. Kirk's Hubris.
Yes,
and
I saw that.
In that episode, I talked about crashing on my bike and pogoing off my head, and how my hubris led to that accident and me almost breaking my neck and maybe killing myself. And I didn't realize this, but it looked like this. And later I asked Jessamy if this was the case, and Jessamy confirmed that it was. That Jessamy hearing this episode made Jessamy reckon with my mortality, and she wanted to make sure that she had told me a few things before I leave this planet, which I don't plan to be anytime soon. But she sent one of the nicest set of words I have ever received.
Oh my gosh.
She thinks of me as a mentor, and she recounted a number of different experiences. And she even mentioned out of the bullet point list our episode, You and Me, in which we had a fight on the air. And she talked about how that lesson and the model, and also just the men doing this, gives her hope.
Right.
And it was just such a wonderful email, and I went back and forth with her a little bit. So
that's amazing.
And then, Berto, the other coincidence is I have been reviewing old episodes to potentially rerun.
Uh-huh.
And this week, I have been listening to some episodes I recorded almost 11 years ago in which I interviewed my students.
Oh.
And Jessamy was one of the students
one of the interviewees.
Yeah. Wow. So I was listening to her, and also she's emailing me and then tonight, Berto.
Pops up in the, oh my goodness.
I mean, what does this mean? Should I buy a lottery ticket or something?
Yeah.
So, Jessamy, wow, just thank you for being a patron for all that time and being one of the top overall contributors to this podcast. And we also have Nora from God Knows Where.
Nora.
It's been a patron since 2021. Thank you, y'all, for being a patron at any level, seriously. We would not be doing any of this if the patrons weren't there.
Yeah.
Doing their part. And, if you can't be a patron, you can't afford it, that's also fine, just whatever you can afford.
Like and subscribe below.
So, anonymous long-term patron, so I have a category of that on the contact form. It's 3+ years. So we have anonymous long-term patron. He says, "Hi, Kirk and Humberto. In a recent episode, you briefly spoke of entitlement in the workplace." So, chime in here. I think we were talking about destructive entitlement and how when you are not given what you deserve to get when you're a kid, like love and attention, you might have destructive entitlement, is what Naj called it. And it makes us as adults take from other people. And so I don't know if that's what I was talking about, but anyway, so he says, in a recent episode, you briefly spoke about entitlement in the workplace. As an elder millennial with a college degree and an elder millennial, is that like 35?
Elder millennial?
Yeah.
That sounds, what am I? An ancient grizzled X generation?
No. It means the older end of millennials.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So as a millennial with a college degree and an inability to get a fair raise, it really struck a chord with me as I've been experiencing it, but didn't have a name for those feelings. Oh, okay. So anonymous patron saying that he's experienced entitlement in the workplace. I've had several bad situations happen to me in the workplace, like getting passed up for a promised promotion multiple times by less qualified people, pay raises, getting lost in the system for months. I've been working through these feelings. Sometimes the entitlement feelings really hit me and I become the worst kind of worker. I was wondering if you could speak more on the relationship between entitlement and the workplace. Does unfair treatment usually lead to a sense of entitlement? Berto, what do you think?
Yeah. I can so relate to this. What's funny is that all of our work and reward systems are very artificial and abstract, right? Like, if you think about it, so I have a company and I have a leveling system. And in this leveling system, let's say we have levels 1 through 5. You start at level 1. If you do good, you get promoted. And doing good means that someone, probably me or someone under me, decides that you did good. And then if you get promoted, you get N% more money, which I've decided to because it's my company and things like this. And it's all arbitrary. There's no Pythagorean perfect solid here. It's just whatever I decide. It's all arbitrary in a way. I mean, it's markets and, it's probably a fair wage based on where you live and stuff like that. But still, yet, while we're in those systems, we want to play the game, right? Because humans are very good at learning games and playing games. So when you're in the system, you're like, okay, I've been told that I'm currently at level 2. That makes me feel like I'm kind of on the low end of the scale. I want to go higher because I want to be on the higher end of the scale. What do I have to do? Well, I've been told that these are the actions I need to take. So I'm going to take those actions. Well, but now I didn't get to level 3, even though I took those actions. I am extremely upset. Now, in reality, what's happened? Nothing fundamentally concrete has happened. Like, you just work at a place and you get some money and you spend it on food and whatever, and some arbitrary number was not assigned to your data file in the company because of reasons. But in your mind, this is everything. This is the game you're playing, and someone's cheated you out of something should have been yours. So that's where that entitlement comes in. You're like, I did everything you told me and I didn't get what I was owed. Now I'm upset. I have felt this directly for sure. I remember when I started in the workforce, I had been an intern at this place and then I got hired. And about 3, maybe 4 months later, these other 2 people got hired, and they were hired one level higher with more money. And I was so furious. I'm like, I went to my recruiter, I went to my manager. I'm like, how is this possible? Now, in reality, all of us were making almost about the same amount of money, and it didn't really matter. But to me, I felt there was this extreme injustice because, relatively speaking,
and also, if you hadn't known what level they were,
then I wouldn't have been bothered.
But if you knew intellectually that it might be happening, that's different than seeing it right before your eyes. We actually have research on primates, on monkeys, that if you give a monkey like a celery stick, they've ran these experiments, the monkey's like, oh, thanks for the celery stick, and eats it. Then you have 2 monkeys and they're near each other, and you give one monkey like a grape and you give the other monkey a celery stick, then the celery stick guy is like, fuck you, and throws the celery stick down.
Are you calling me a monkey? But that's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's so I can relate to that feeling. It is a real feeling. Now, it might have sounded like I was minimizing the importance of these games, as I call them, but in reality, it does matter because guess what? The world revolves around money. The world we live in revolves around money. If you don't have enough money, you don't have enough safety and security. So it does matter. And if you have been told certain things and you are doing them and you're not getting what you were supposed to get, it does matter. At the same time, I got to tell you, the amount of agony I felt was probably not healthy. I wish I would have at the time had ways to, deal with it a little bit better.
Right, because let's say that you legit are being treated unfairly. There's a limited set of actions you can take that are viable, and when you evaluate all of them, like our mutual friend, I won't name him, he, for the last number of years, has been struggling at work and feeling underappreciated. And he would often ask me to talk with him about it. And I would hear a lot of details. And the conclusion that I came to after a number of months was, because I'd ask him all these questions, like, in terms of supporting him and other things, but I would also ask, like, well, are you thinking about leaving? And he'd say, like, yeah, I mean, maybe. And I'd say, like, oh, okay, well, what's the likelihood of you being able to find another job that is just as good? And he'd say, yeah, fairly good. And I'd say, okay, well, what's the likelihood of you being able to find a similar job with similar pay and similar work that you would be more appreciated or even paid more or something? And he'd say, oh, no, there's almost no, I have a pretty good contract at my current job, and in all likelihood, if I were to work somewhere else, I would be working for a bigger company with less personal relationships, and I'd be starting from the bottom again. So, and so I say, so is there any other kind of industry you could work in? Because, you really want to be appreciated and you have a certain level of income that you're looking for. Do you have any other alternative? And, he's older than us as well. And so he doesn't have all the time in the world to build a new career. And what he kept telling me was, no, there's no viable alternative to the job I have right now that I would be paid more, appreciated more. But he just kept being bothered by this underappreciation,
right,
by his current bosses. And although I could absolutely sympathize with that, when he would ask me, what would you do, Kirk, if you were in this situation? I would say, I said, well, I can't know exactly because I'm not in your shoes, but logically you should stay at your job because there's not a better one out there. But he just could not live, and he wasn't being abused. He was just being, underappreciated, and some of this stuff was happening, like what anonymous long-term patron is saying, was they would promise him something and not give it to him. And I say, well, would another job be better? And he'd be like, probably not. And I'm like, well, the best thing for you is to figure out a way to cope with that emotionally and stay at that job and maybe find other ways of getting appreciation in the world, or maybe going on a campaign to change your relationship with your boss or something, And it's his life, but he could not hear that and eventually left his job. And now he's at a new one. And from my understanding, it's not an improvement from the last one. And, maybe that's for the best. So maybe someone's just like, fuck you.
Maybe you just need a change of scenery.
I need to start over with a new group of people that hasn't fucked me over yet. I just can't fucking go to work all the time for these assholes.
Yeah.
Maybe it's that. But I think that's another element to this of that when we're, especially when we're a part of a large group of people being evaluated, that there can be these rabbit holes that we will go down in negativity, even though we're legitimately being treated in a negative way. And it's counter to our own life to go down those roads. Like you're never going to have the power to make your bosses appreciate you, and that's not cool. That's unfair and it's not right. But sometimes this adherence to, well, this must not stand, that attitude doesn't necessarily work well in the practical world all the time. You know what I mean?
Look, I was in, as you might remember, I was in a job for 5 years where I really felt that. I felt not only underappreciated, but like mistreated. And I stayed too long. I stayed 5 years too long. But the first year, I would say probably not much I could do because I feel like I needed to be there. But here's the thing that happened. I went to a professional coach outside of work. I went to a professional coach that my mom had hooked me up with. They used to be a boss of hers. It was this awesome lady. So it's kind of like a therapist, but it was like professional coach,
Yeah.
And I went to her and we talked about this, and she had this great advice for me. I'm not saying this would work for everyone, not in every case, but given my context, my situation, her advice was, because I would tell her about all these storms that would brew and all this yelling and stressful and stuff. And she asked me like what I do in the rest of my life to cope with stressful situations. And I mentioned, which you will probably see that it resonates, is I mentioned humor, that I use humor in my life to diffuse situations, right? Like we've even had very funny situations with my dad where that was the case. And so I use humor, and she suggested, okay, well, is there a way that you could, not like become the office joker or something, but just like, is there a way that you could change your narrative to make it, like to find the humor, or maybe at least the tragic humor in it, or whatever. And the other thing she said was, look, there's all this maelstrom running around, all this like chaos and waves and stuff. I wonder if there's a way where you can let it just wash over you, but not get taken by it. And we talked about it, and I put that into practice my last year there. And it worked. Again, I'm not saying this is like fail-safe or whatever, but it did, because it was like this little mental switch where I would be in a meeting and people would start with the usual raising the voices and everything's stressful. And then I did two things. One is I just let it just watch. Instead of the feeling of like, I must compete, I must out yell or outstate this person. I'm like, no, just let it wash. And then I would basically try to diffuse the situation with a funny quip or just a comment or some levity. And it totally worked. First of all, it made me happier. Second, I actually saw some smiles from people that are usually only aggressive. And third, at the end of that year, even though I left because I had already decided I was leaving, I got the best feedback from everyone. It was like, it like really had changed my environment, even though it was the same team. It was the same, and the leadership was still the same. Everything was still the same, but I just changed the way I operated within that environment. Now that said, I did leave because so it wasn't like a solution to stay there forever. It was just,
and for you, there was a better path somewhere else. You weren't taking a major hit on your career.
True. That said, looking back on it, and there are things about that role that I actually really remember fondly, that because I did put a lot of work and I did a lot of things that I'm proud of. But that said, I think it would have been healthier for me. I should have shaved maybe at least 3 years off of that experience, even
Why-
if it meant
Why
going
did you
to
prolong it?
because I felt stuck because of the things you were describing. I felt like, oh, I can't go anywhere. Oh, there was a combination of factors. A, I felt stuck. B, I felt like I needed to prove to them that, like I needed to show them
Yeah.
or something like that. It was like this very unhealthy situation.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying that in every situation you're supposed to grin and bear it. By no means. If there's, with you, Berto, I would talk with you about that situation as well. It's funny because I have a vision in my head of what your boss looks like and what his desk looks like because you would describe these situations, and I have no idea what this guy looks like, but I have a definite in my head he's like a little paunchy and maybe balding and white and wears like very businessy, like Dockers and like a frumpled white button-up shirt. How close am I?
No.
So anyway, I am not saying that you shouldn't leave. With Berto, I remember telling you, hey, fuck this department.
Yeah.
You've got so many at least lateral, if not even upward mobility in your skill set and your organization. So stop barking up that tree. But I will highlight something that you're saying, which is I'll relate it to differentiation. Is that the ability to reflect on your emotions and not get swept away with it. That's what this coach helped you with, is to let it wash over you. And along those lines, in terms of the kinds of things like our friend was talking with me about, and also what Anonymous Long-Term Patron is talking about, is if there's a problem to be mulled over and discussed and explored and solved, then allocate the time to thinking about it. Hey, I'm being screwed over by my boss, and that's a problem. What are my alternatives? What can I do about it? Can I do something in-house? Do I leave? What can I do? Those brain cells and that time and that effort and those discussions and that support and those emotions are critical to understanding your needs and to getting what you want. But you have to section that off, because if you're all day long at work obsessing and noticing and highlighting in your head, you're only just bringing yourself down, right? Yeah. So it's not that you just sweep it under the rug. It's you put it in a drawer and then you set a time like Friday at 5 where you sit down and think about it for an hour.
Time box it. I like it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of job elements that are kind of like that, where I find that people can't let it go. They can't differentiate. And they go from job to job, because every job is going to have its bullshit, you know what I mean? And sometimes you don't know it, but the bullshit you're dealing with right now at a job is the lesser amount of bullshit you'll experience at other jobs. There's this grass is always greener thing. And, I'm not saying status quo, stay where you're at, but sometimes you just have to, like for me at Antioch University, there was so much bullshit, but as a therapist, I would spend time noticing and dealing, and I would talk with the therapist colleague professors around me, and we would, work on this stuff in this way of like, well, there's only so much power you have, and what can you do about it, and what can you not do about it, and how are you going to live your life, and how can you live in the moment and focus on the things that you enjoy. Like for me, it was, I always had the students, and I always had teaching, and administration or contract disputes never touched that. That I always had. I always had the ability to do that. And but if I didn't watch it, all that bullshit would start to get into the classroom, and I would start letting it ruin that thing. So I think there's a lot of things you can do differentiation wise. But to answer your question briefly, Anonymous Long-Term Patron, you're saying, does unfair treatment usually lead to a sense of entitlement? The answer is yes. Destructive entitlement is absolutely a phenomenon. As a minor example that I can think of is when I was struggling financially after getting a bachelor's degree in business, by the way, I had $5 to my name and a couple gallons of gas in my car, and I've already looked for jobs. I got a job at Foot Locker, and the boss was just an abusive asshole. I don't use that phrase lightly. And I just suddenly quit one day. And so I was already working at Foot Locker in a humiliated way. I mean, no offense against working at Foot Locker, but it's like I have a degree in business. I've studied finance and economics and accounting, and I'm selling shoes. It's what's going on here. This isn't what I thought was going to happen. And so I got a job working at Godfather's Pizza. By the way, you have a shirt right now that says The Godfather, right?
Yes, the Dogfather.
The Dogfather.
It's a bluey shirt. Yeah, I got this from my family.
Yeah. So Godfather's Pizza was a pizza place back in the day. I don't know if it exists anymore, but
Oh, that's true. I remember all their commercials.
Yeah.
The mafia thing going.
Yeah, well, it was some kind of phrase like, do it.
Do it.
Come on in and get the best pizza ever. Do it. Or we'll make you a pizza you can't refuse. Or
yeah.
I don't think that's what it was, but that should have been it. Anyway.
That should have been it.
Yeah. So when I worked there, I was, struggling financially, and I was working for minimum wage at Godfather's, and I didn't even have that many hours at Godfather. So, because there's a lot of workers,
right,
competing for the various different shifts, most of them high school students, by the way, which is the natural order of things at Godfather. Yeah. But whenever you would mess up a pizza, you would put it on this counter, and the employees could take and eat it at the break.
Okay.
And maybe even take it home with them. Yeah. Well, at the time, Godfather's was offering this extra large pizza. It was giant. It was like, you've seen big pizzas. This one was just extra. It was just huge. Yeah, it was just a huge circular pizza. And Godfather's Pizza also, it's not thin crust. It's like Pizza Hut crust, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
It's got some.
It's got a lot of bread.
It's got a lot of calories to get a starving 22-year-old through the week. And so I felt screwed over, not by Godfather so much, but just by life. And whenever one of these ginormous pizzas would get screwed up and get put on the counter, people had a general vibe about how you approached it. People would be like, oh, okay, we're sharing this, so I'll have one slice for me and I'll leave the rest for well, as soon as that thing landed on the counter, I was like Mission Impossible, dun 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 dun. I was coming down from the rafters, figuring out a way to sneak this thing out of the restaurant and into the back seat of my car, because what I would do is I would bring it home and I would put it in the fridge, and I would buy really cheap waxy cheese and stuff to add to it, right? And I'd put it back in the oven, and I would make it taller, because if I couldn't, it's like I'm Jesus trying to make 2 fish last for 5,000 people.
Oh my gosh!
And and I did not care about anyone else that worked there. I'm just like that I'm bringing that pizza home, and I'm going to take that, and I'm going to be selfish because I need this thing. Looking back, that was super selfish.
Sure.
The other people might have been in a similar situation. Yeah. Certainly it's not my right, but you could argue I felt entitled because life was screwing me. I wasn't completely screwed over, but things were going well.
Right.
Fast forward a year later, when I had a better job, I would never do that. Japanese people and people in my family, that's like the worst thing you can do is to take other people's food.
But don't you think part of it was the culture of mob? You were in a mob family when you worked at Godfather's.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what, that pizza was making me an offer that I could not refuse. Let's take a break. When we get back, one more email. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. Let's do an OPP, Berto.
OPP.
So we're continuing the list of the largest contributors over the 9 years that we've been on Patreon.
It's easy as 1, 2, 3.
Oh no, is this a trend? We have Stephanie from West Bountiful, Utah, has contributed quite a bit since 2018. We have Anita from God knows where. We have Chris from Denver, Colorado.
Oh, nice.
We have Ashley from Flushing, New York.
What? Flushing? I've never heard of that.
We have Megan from Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Been a patron since 2016. We have.
I wonder if they've been to the Kentucky Derby.
That's like saying someone's from Washington State. I wonder if they've been to the Space Needle. Or I wonder if Berto is a cocaine dealer.
What? No, you cannot put cocaine dealing in the same category as Kentucky Derby.
It's the one thing you know about Kentucky, apparently.
Well, right. But like I've obviously have dealt cocaine. It's unlikely they've actually gone to the Derby.
I ran into this during our family reunion. My sister's husband, Cliff, my brother-in-law, he was telling a story, and I had a good quip that I thought of, and because his name is Cliff, I can't remember what the context was, but I was like, so did they push you off a cliff or something like that?
Yeah.
It made sense. It was relevant and it made sense.
I'm imagining it being funny at the time.
It was not funny.
Oh, okay.
But at least it made sense. And he was like, ah, ha, 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 like false, fake laughter. And I thought, of course, Kirk, he has probably heard cliff jokes for his entire life. Cliff bars, cliff jumping, like, in the same way that if someone makes a Honda joke or a Captain Kirk joke, it's like, oh, I've never heard that one before. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, so cocaine and also Kentucky Derby.
Kentucky Derby.
Yeah. Well, we'll try it on this one, Berto. Try. Dylan is from Arlington, Minnesota.
Ha! I bet you he's been feeling Minnesota.
Oh,
I don't know. I've got nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know anything
do you know what? Do you know who sang that line? Who wrote that line?
Feeling Minnesota? No.
Chris Cornell.
Oh.
We have Anonymous from Vancouver, BC. Phil from Seattle, Washington.
Ooh. Wait. Has he been to the Space Needle?
And we have Tashia from Raleigh, North Carolina. Anything about North Carolina?
Yeah, North Carolina is where Epic Games are from. So this person must play a lot of Fortnite.
And lastly, Heather, who I've talked with from Newton, Mass.
Oh, Massachusetts. I was from Worcester, which is great, but I always thought it was pronounced. Actually, I thought it was spelled Ustern because when I was little, my dad would tell me it's Worcester, and I thought it was Ustern. And so later, when I was looking at it in a map, I could never find it. So I thought that it was a fictitious place.
Good story.
Yeah.
Patron Alex from Portland, he says, I'm not sure this is an area of your expertise, but I think it would be nice to hear your thoughts on gaming addiction. I myself suffer from gaming addiction. I can go months without playing, only to dive in again. It interferes with what I want to be doing in my life, and if I could push a button to make the game go away forever, I would. Do you have any thoughts or advice? Thanks. So, Berto, any advice for Patron Alex from Portland?
Well, first of all, technically speaking, I don't feel like I've ever been fully, constantly addicted to a specific video game or a set of video games to where it really constantly negatively affected my life. That said,
I would argue you've never been even mildly, because like on the scale of addiction, you've had a problem like when you really get into a game. But people who suffer from addiction to gaming, like it ruins their lives.
There is a reason I'm qualifying it though, because there were 2 instances in my past where it got scary, but it was just a contained amount of time. The first time was when the game Daggerfall came out, which is the precursor to the precursor to the precursor to Skyrim. Daggerfall was this amazing visionary ahead of its time game, and me and my friend Eric played it. We were playing it every day, all the time. So much so that, first of all, I was skipping classes at college. I was skipping classes. I was staying up all night and going to work without sleep, or sleeping like 1 hour or something, coming home and continuing to play. It got so bad that I actually started, when I would walk through the hallway in real life, I would start seeing visions from the game, because the game was in first person mode and stuff. It was really creepy. And that felt addicting, because like I couldn't stop. And I felt this fear of like, when I'm at work, he's asleep. But when I get home, if I say I'm too tired, we won't get to play. I have to play. So it was kind of addicting.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, that's a good description of it. But the difference between you and Alex
is I stopped.
Yeah.
At some point. Then there was another episode when the game Final Fantasy XI released, which was a massive online multiplayer game. I had a month. I took off from work, so I wasn't missing work, but I took off from work, and all I did that month was play that game relentlessly with very little sleep. I barely ate. Like, that's all I did. And it was like some amazing experiences, but it was definitely getting scary. And like it got to a point where I was like, all right, I have to be done. I can't. And I just stopped cold turkey. It was just so much. But so those were the only 2 times where I fully bordered on addictive behavior.
Cold turkey, like you just stopped playing Final Fantasy?
I stopped playing. I had to, because
like you never picked it up again.
Not that game.
Huh?
Not that game.
Wow.
No.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I can, in a small way, relate to that feeling of like being trapped in, like, I gotta keep playing. I can't stop. And one of the things about Final Fantasy XI that made it extra tricky is when it got released, it had already been released in Japan months or maybe even a year prior or something. So maybe it was a month. Either way, the Japanese players were a higher level. And so if you wanted to get in good parties, you had to play with Japan. But guess what? That's a completely different time zone. So it was like this feeling of like, okay, I partied with my friends during the day, but now I get to be in the good parties at night. So I guess I just won't sleep. And it was like, I'll just trade everything so I can play this game. It was great and terrifying.
Yeah. The thing I'll say, Alex, you know, you're like, do you have any thoughts or advice? Is it's the same as any other compulsion or addiction. You have a slippery slope. It's often progressive, meaning that it gets worse over time. It can run in families, you know, generally the compulsion. So your parents or your aunts and uncles or your grandparents might have suffered from a different addiction, but an addiction nonetheless. Some people seem to get a higher range of reactivity to life that can make them more susceptible to addiction. The way it works in your brain is that when you feel a reward, then there's a potential, particularly if you have a susceptibility to compulsion, there's a potential pathway to having the itch to recreate that pleasure, that reward, very great. Whereas there are some people that are born with deadened nervous systems. Deadened isn't the right word, but attenuated maybe is a better word. You know, like some people will say the first time that they had alcohol or the first time they got high or the first time they used cocaine or something, you know, they went through the roof in terms of how good it felt. Whereas other people use and they're like, I mean, there's some people that use substances and it doesn't affect them at all for various different reasons. Anyway, the point is that there are genetic and also behavioral things, like if it was modeled to you growing up. Also, if you have trauma and you don't have a way of helping yourself with that, or more broadly with emotional regulation, you know, particularly for men, we are not given, I mean, no one is given enough tools for emotional regulation and awareness and taking care of oneself, but young boys and men by consequence are given even less. And a lot of people are walking around in a state of distress and pain and worry, and they don't even know that they're distressed. You know, they're like an 8 out of 10, but if you ask them, they'd be like, I'm fine. And they're not lying. They because when you're distressed, when you're chronically distressed, it's not like you're in a constant state of just like, I'm distressed,
Yeah.
but meanwhile, your cortisol is firing, your brain subconsciously is a storm, your blood pressure is up. There's a lot of things that are going on outside of your awareness. And so without any way of coping with that, one can land on compulsive activities like video games that actually do relieve you. When you sit down and play a video game, you are focusing on something else. It's very distracting. It can also be very rewarding, but potentially you're accomplishing things. So there's a reason why some people, there's the compulsion and the attraction and the addiction and even the physical addiction, but there's also people who have compulsive problems because they're running away from their feelings. And when I say that out loud, it sounds like a simplistic statement, but it's not simple. Like I said, it's not like someone's like, I'm sad that my wife divorced me, I'm going to play video games. I mean, it might be that, but it can just be like this amorphous level of self-esteem thorns in your side, or this completely unknown subconscious feeling that life just isn't good, or your life isn't good, or you're not good, or something, and you're not even consciously aware of it, and you're in pain, and subconsciously you notice that when you do this compulsive activity, you don't feel it as much or at all, and so it can cause one to have a problem with it. Anyway, so it's just, but we could replace the entire conversation with something else. Instead of video games, we could be talking about alcohol. We could be talking about porn addiction. We could be talking about
clothing purchasing addiction.
Yeah. So it tends to all have the same roots. In fact, I'll just say that all the compulsions have the same roots, of which there are many roots that will grow into these various compulsions. Video game addiction and compulsion is greater now because you have a whole generation of people that had this from the time they were born, maybe, but more
right.
in more overt ways, maybe when they're like 10 years old, and your distress might go all the way back then. So I say all this to highlight that video game addiction is just as serious as heroin addiction. And you wouldn't say to someone with heroin addiction, well, you just have to figure it out on your own.
Right.
You have to have a treatment plan. You have to have professionals. You have to have support. You have to come out of the closet. You have to have a lot of behavioral change. And with video game addiction, it's the same thing. You have to have a treatment plan. You have to potentially have professionals. You have to, in all likelihood, go to a 12-step program or some kind of support group. And in the first, the general rule is when you're trying to really break a habit, in the first 90 days, you go to 90 meetings. Like if you are trying to not drink, you go to 90 AA meetings in 90 days. Oh. Is it guaranteed to work? No. But, and there are some emerging medical assistance that can help with the compulsion. You can ask your physician or your treatment provider, drug and alcohol treatment provider, about that. But a lot of people have recovered from addiction with this model of they talk about it, they investigate their emotions, they get support. You might have to get rid of your devices. In the first year, you might not be able to have a computer at home. If you live by yourself and you can't hand over your devices to someone, it'd be like an alcoholic that has a bar. They work at a bar. They live in a bar. It's that serious. You know what I mean? You might have to change your friends. You might have to completely get rid of all of your friends because they also have problems, or at least they game and don't understand or are hurt that you're not going to game with them. And you might, and then you have to rebuild your life. What is your life without gaming? What else is there in life to do? So it's comprehensive. Is my point, Alex. So that's my advice: is to understand it and approach it as comprehensively as an alcoholic, as a cocaine addict, as a heroin addict. It's the same, and it's the only way out. The way you're talking, that's likely what is required. You can't dilly-dally or approach it like, well, I'll just never do this again, or I'll just play this other game that's less addictive, or I'll refrain from playing video games for the next 3 months, and then you start playing video games in 3 months, and the slippery slope leads to you end up becoming a problem again. It's not necessarily the case, but it kind of sounds like that to me. It sounds like you have a periods of time where you're abstaining, but you either relapse, or you aren't really committed to never playing video games again, or you don't have a way of having moderate gaming or minimal gaming over time. You don't have guardrails in place. I don't know. There's just a lot of different things that you have to do to break an addiction. And Alex, you deserve to be happy. And addiction sucks and recovery sucks, but it's so worth it. And there's so much to benefit, not only just not having the monkey on your back, but also there's so much emotional growth. And there, often what happens is after 1 or 2 years, once the pain and the annoyance is gone or is minimal, then there's this blossoming of a human where for the first time in your life you're able to lift your head up and breathe and experience things and discover your needs and to actually get your needs met, talking about your feelings, having relationships, and and maybe you're already doing that, Alex, but often addiction will get in the way or be a replacement of it. So it's a wonderful, glorious process that you have to go on faith to some extent, and that's where these support groups come into play, because you'll have people that are further down the road than you in these groups, and they can say, hey, I'm 10 years down the road, and I can tell you there's a whole life of wonderfulness ahead of you, but right now it's going to suck. Anything to add to that, Berto?
Yeah, the only other thing that occurs to me is that these game companies do have some responsibility here. Because, see, it's not like there's no way to detect how long someone's playing. Right? Like, they're signed in. So,
and they all require that you be online and signed in anyway, which is bullshit.
That's right. So, first of all, even if you didn't want to do it like, well, there's a limit of 10 hours a day or something, which is still a shit ton of time playing a game, but whatever. You could design the game in such a way where the mechanic of the game requires you to rest. There have been games like that, by the way, and some streaming services try to say like, hey, but no one really takes it seriously, and there's no regulations around this. So if someone wants to binge watch Netflix 24/7, they can. If someone wants to play these online games constantly, they can. I think there's some responsibility there, because it's like the drug being provided with unlimited supply to someone who has these problems. It seems unethical to me. But anyways,
it's the balance between freedoms and what, it's like when Washington State passed the law that everyone had to wear a seatbelt. When they passed that law in the late 80s, it bothered me because I thought, well, yeah, people should wear their seatbelts, but I don't want to be required by law. I don't want to get a ticket if I am just randomly not wearing a seatbelt one time. That's draconian. Like, it's my choice. Like, I'm the one that loses if I'm not wearing a seatbelt, So what else are you going to do? Require me to eat vegetables? Like, it's going to be like, that's literally what the road we're going down, Fast forward a couple years, and I don't give a shit about the law because seatbelts are fine. But it's that kind of thing, because along these lines, Berto, if you had that law, then you would, of course, have to have a law that grocery stores couldn't sell alcohol to a single individual beyond a certain amount, or might even identify an individual as having a problem and statewide, it's illegal to sell alcohol to a particular individual.
Yeah.
In an isolated event, you would say, well, yeah, let's do that because what a wonderful thing. But then you start getting into all sorts of government control over things. And of course, it can be abused.
Like, with some of these things, it doesn't just impact, because the argument is usually, well, the individual it's their life if they want to throw it away. But it doesn't just impact the individual. As you know, when someone's got an addiction, it creates this crater around them that impacts everyone, the community. Let alone if it is a drug and substance type thing where it can be dangerous, all these things. But just it is not just about them. So now, is there a line somewhere? Yeah, absolutely. I just feel like we're too far in one direction where there's no limits. Anyone can do anything they want at all times with these streaming services and games and things.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm just a product of my current regulatory landscape, but if there's a role for the government or for society or law, it's to start early with education and also helping families with the foundational aspects as to why people become susceptible to addiction in the first place. You know, I'm just going to take a guess and say that Alex's early childhood, or throughout his childhood or life, that there were events and chronic events that are contributing to the addiction. And so many things can be solved when we, for example, have funds available to families below the poverty line or even close to the poverty line, having taxes. I mean, there's enough rich people around that you take their money, or it's not like if you're earning not super rich, you just take someone that is earning $450,000 a year. They don't need all that fucking money. And you don't have to take all of it, but you take proportionally more of it, and you give it to people who are working for minimum wage or can't work because they have 3 kids at home. And what happens is those children and those parents, their life goes a lot better. And thus, all sorts of social ills don't occur. Crime, dropout, theft, violence, addiction, not having any skills or ambition to be a productive member of society. And that's just one measure that we know from science that actually works. So I would be up for that, because then what do you do? Like, if a video game company were to not do this or to make it too easy to work around, who do you put in jail? I guess you could fine them. I guess that would be the thing.
All right, how about this? What if, so we have this video game. What if there's a way for a person to voluntarily turn on a setting? And you would say, well, why would they do that if they're addicted? But, addicts have moments of temporary mini clarity, and then they go back. But in those moments, oftentimes they try to take steps. It's just that usually the system is rigged against them, so they go back to the thing. I've seen this with people in my life where they temporarily try to do the right things. And then, so imagine there's a setting where on a good day, I say, you know what? I've been playing this too much. Okay, I'm gonna do this. And you have to sign a thing. I'm gonna turn this on and you have to sign this thing. Once you've turned that setting on, it tapers you down. It doesn't immediately go cold turkey. It basically, for that first day, you can play as much as you played the previous day. The next day, it tapers down by an hour or whatever. And then it tapers you down to some amount where it's 2 hours a day or something like that.
What does it do? Does it just click off?
It gives you a warning, and you have to, depending on the kind of game it is, if you have to finish a quest, fine, and then you're done for the day or whatever. And of course, are there ways around it? Could you create other accounts? Yes, but the point is that now you have to pay for the other account and blah, blah, blah. And to unclick the switch, you would need some sort of doctor's note or therapist note or something like that. You can't just unclick it yourself, basically. That way it starts with the personal choice, but the system is able to help you taper down.
Yeah.
Because these aren't things that, unlike the drugs and the alcohol, this is 100% trackable.
Yeah. And it's possible mini solution, but to me, if I use alcohol as an analogy, you would have a grocery store where you have an app on your phone, and it sends an alarm to your phone that says you've bought too many beers this week or something, like, because like you said, not every game is under the same business, right? Like you can play another game, or you can have another computer, you can have another account. So unless you get real draconian with it, where
well, if you're talking alcohol, that I definitely don't mind getting draconian. Like, look, if you have previously been either convicted or put in some register because you are an alcoholic, because you've either been hospitalized or you've been to rehab or whatever, absolutely, you should be on a list, because you are a danger to people. All you have to do is get in a car and you will kill people, right? So what would I do is basically, once you're there, like now every time you go to buy, the system is such that yes, that store owner is notified of how much this person can or can't drink or whatever. And will people break the law? Yes, but then at least now there's a law, and you can go after the people that break the law.
There's it's literally illegal to use heroin, but people don't have a problem getting their hands on heroin.
Yeah, this is true. Yes, but
and then what do you do with them when they break the law? We're going to fill the prisons with them. I know you don't want that.
Well,
or you find them into oblivion.
Would I rather someone go to jail before they kill someone? Yes.
Well, yeah, but you are on the record saying that you don't want people going to jail for drug crimes. You don't even want drugs to be illegal. You've said
that's right. I want drugs to be taxed and regulated, but regulation is important, and the regulation would include not overselling to someone, right?
Well, that's making part of the use illegal.
Yeah, it's regulating it. I mean, but like we make it illegal to drink for minors.
Yeah,
minors do drink, but they're breaking the law, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, I don't have any skin in the game. If the government wanted to take that on, I'd be interested to hear a proposal or go along with something. But it certainly flies in the face of general way in which most governments, at least in the Western world, operate. And
it's like sex offenders get registered, right? And that when they move into a neighborhood, something triggers. Everyone gets notified.
But that's saying that anyone who has a compulsion with alcohol is at risk of driving drunk and hitting somebody.
Well, you can make the threshold. You could certainly argue the threshold.
And certainly,
what if you've already been convicted of a driving violation while
intoxicated? But that's a small minority of people who suffer from alcohol addiction. Yeah. You're only capturing and maybe that's that I could get behind.
We start with that.
Yeah, but that's not treating the alcohol. That's treating driving drunk. And to help them with their alcohol addiction would help. But I mean, I don't know. I think we're generally on the same page. But yeah, I mean, to me, in my world, there are answers. Is the thing. I think to you don't live in my world. And if we had better funded programs and outreach and free programs and fun programs and like if you have a video game addiction, he lives in Portland. I'm not, up to speed on the landscape of video game addiction treatments options, but I'm going to take a guess and say that they're limited and potentially either inconvenient or expensive. You can find a therapist, but that's just once a week, and that's not going to be a huge help. I mean, there's certainly Video Game Addiction Anonymous, and that's online often, so I know that that's available and free. But, sometimes you need more than that. Sometimes you need a whole village around you at all times. And so if we wanted to do something with government funds and effort, I would say take tax dollars and start paying for programs around that,
Yeah. I guess part of my frustration is that we have things like, my brother got shingles. He's younger than me. So when that happened, I was like, oh God.
When did he get shingles?
Like a year ago, 2 years ago or something like that.
I must have known about that.
Oh my God, this is terrible. I'm going to go get vaccinated. So I went and I found out that I couldn't. I'm like, why not? Well, you're not 50 yet. I'm like, but I want to get vaccinated. My brother had, yeah, but you have to be 50. But what if I get a doctor's note? No, you have to be 50. So I'm like, we have that law, right? That law prevents me from getting a preventative vaccine just because they're limiting the supply, whatever. like that's a law that exists. But yet there is nothing to stop someone that's nearly killed themselves repeatedly for years with a substance that is regulated, because you can't sell it without a license.
Yeah,
you can't sell it after a certain time. You can't sell it to minors. All these things.
You understand that if you make alcohol illegal, which we have done in the past, it doesn't work.
No, not illegal.
You're making part of the use illegal for some individuals. They will find a way around it. And they might start committing crimes, and their lives will go down the tubes even faster. We know this. That's why in sensible governmental regulation towns like Vancouver, BC, and Seattle for that matter, we are moving towards decriminalization of substances and paying for treatment and trauma recovery services. That's the sensible way. It's not. It doesn't solve the problem overnight.
There's middle grounds, right? Like, what if it's not illegal, but you can only sell them one bottle? And they're like, well, okay, but then they'll go to, okay, but you keep making it hard for them to want to go to the extra.
I think you
effort.
just have I'm going to take a guess, and you can ask me to cut this out. I'm not going to say anything specific, but I think you have a particular current frustration.
Well, of course. Because I've been
there to be like help. You want help.
I've been horrified by the lack of system in place to address it.
But given the landscape that you can get your hands on illegal substances, including alcohol if you made it illegal, the individual who suffers from the addiction is the one driving the car. That sucks, and you are dealing with that right now, and you're wanting an outside force, which, if there was, that was sensible.
But let me ask you this.
I get it, but
certainly we wouldn't advocate like, hey, we shouldn't have there's that drug that makes it so that when you drink the alcohol, it tastes or feels horrible, it makes you sick. We certainly wouldn't argue, well, let's not even make that drug because people won't take it, so it's pointless, right? We wouldn't argue that you wouldn't argue that preventative measures are pointless because so many times they'll just work around it. You'll say, no, let's try all those measures.
And we do.
Right?
But the individual has to volunteer for those things.
So similarly, what I'm saying, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I'm saying is I feel like when it comes to the capitalist motive of selling a substance in unlimited, infinite supplies to someone, at that point, no one's trying anything.
No, we are, and there are things you can do, and there are things that we do, like you can say you can't market cigarettes to children, for example, or alcohol to children, or I think there are regulations in Washington State you can't even advertise cigarettes under most circumstances.
Right.
There's things like putting the warning on the cigarettes. There's cigarette tax. There's alcohol tax. There's a lot of things that are being done. Would it be nice, and I get it, if we could just snap our fingers and get rid of substances altogether? Yes, the world would be a better place without alcohol, without cigarettes, without any of the substances that destroy our lives. Wouldn't it be nice if we also had sensible approaches to helping families so that trauma is less likely? Yeah. I don't know, I'm basically arguing for the status quo plus services, which is a common therapist thing to say.
And I'm with you on the services, and I would explore, is there something we could do to turn the faucet, if not off, turn it from like, it's all the faucets on infinitely every time at all times forever, to like there's some regulations.
Yeah, and with alcohol it'd be hard because there's a lot of people who buy and consume alcohol, and it's not a problem. So you have to have it available for them if you're going to have. I suppose you can make it illegal, but we've already done that and doesn't do anything. It just drives it underground.
Yeah, but you have to show an ID to buy alcohol.
Yeah. What's your point?
Well, you can scan the ID, right? It doesn't have to be for everyone.
So if you wanted to, and you're not saying this directly, but kind of, if you wanted to make a technological answer to this, whenever you buy alcohol, you have to provide an ID, and the ID has to be very good at actually being identifiable as that person's ID, right?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, people will get around it.
Right. But let's say we could figure that out. We could make it more secure, and then you, at the very least, as an individual, when you're having a moment of clarity, you can sign up for a program that says, I have a problem, and for the rest of my life, and around the world, don't let me do this. Now, could the person go underground and get stuff? Sure. But it's a help, it's a barrier in the same way that removing alcohol from the house. Could they drive to the store and buy alcohol? Yeah. But it just creates just a little extra layer. But the person is volunteering for it. You know what I mean? They're asking for it. Like with AA, there will be events where you'll get together, organized events where there's no alcohol there. We're going to play a softball game, or we're going to have a Netflix watching party, or we're going to have a birthday party, or we're going to play video games together, and no one's going to have alcohol there, which is rare under a lot of social circumstances. But for them, they're creating this protective layer. Could the person leave the sober party and go drink? Yeah, but it's a voluntary thing is the thing, and that works. And when enough people have exposure to those options and get enough support, and also get services for the trauma recovery that they often have to go through, then there's a good chance of it working. There's also some medical assistance, anti-abuse, as you mentioned. There's other drugs that are being used right now as well. If we increase that, make them more aware, better fund them, make them free for people, maybe even give them a monetary incentive to do it. I don't know. I think we could see great gains, and we already have. We've seen great gains in reducing cigarette consumption, for example, the things that we have done, but we have not made them illegal for people above 18. But we have made tremendous strides in lowering cigarette use and addiction. We can do this. And if we spent the money and the effort, we can do even more.
Yeah. When you're at a bar, and this has happened to me before, they cut you off because you appear too drunk.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that's a law. Maybe
it's a law. No. It's a big law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like,
so
if that person gets in a wreck, like
right.
the bartender can. Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Look, someone could argue, why make that law? If they want to drink more, they'll just leave and go somewhere where they don't care, and they'll give them more alcohol. But I still think it's a good law. Yeah. And it saved me from getting even drunker, right? Yeah. Now, what I'm saying is, like, I know for a fact there's these scenarios where this person who has gone into the same store and bought multiple bottles of the same liquor and has sometimes come in with bruises and all these things, where that person keeps selling them and has no compunction. I think that's a problem, right?
Okay.
And
so you could extend that law. You could extend that bartender law to the corner store. Yeah, you could do that.
And then basically, sure, some people will drive to the ends of the earth and still do it. Okay.
Well, also, the bartender law is rarely enforced because it's not a focus for our law enforcement, because it's not a focus for our society, and there's not enough money being allocated to pay for police officers or law enforcement people to do spot checks as to whether or not a bartender, because the amount of people that are getting completely sloshed and being served more alcohol, I would say is, among all the times that a super drunk, obviously, person is asking for a drink, no offense to the bartenders out there, but I'm going to take a guess, particularly at certain venues, I'm going to take a guess and say that at least 95% of the time that person is served.
That's fair. So, but then take that and pair it with your approach, which is like now further education to everyone, including the bartender, all of us, so that culturally we start modifying the culture as well. Because here's the thing that the law does. See, without the law, I could accuse the bartender of discriminating. They didn't serve me because I'm Hispanic, or because they should have served me, whatever. But with the law, it's like, no, you were too drunk, right? There is a law in the books. So then what we're talking about is, like, are people following the law? And the reason they may not be following the law is because, there's not enough education, there's not enough information and stuff like that. So I think that all of these things pair together. What I have been previously, you're right, it's very personal for me. I've been just sorely disappointed by the apparent lack of financial disincentive or incentive or whatever to provide these people with unlimited
I stand behind that. I appreciate that. And at the core of the problem is you have a loved one in your life that is refusing to stop or do anything to stop drinking, and has not done so for decades and shows no sign of relenting. That is at the core of the powerlessness and the tragedy and the pain. That is what everything hinges on. And there's nothing rationally, government-wise or regulation-wise, that can account for that, other than just like some kind of sci-fi horror movie where everything is ultra controlled and you are constantly being watched by Big Brother, you know? And I understand that frustration. I do.
Well, actually, when I think of like my spending addictions I've had in the past, there are totally things you could pass with credit card. Like there's laws you could pass that could prevent someone from maxing out credit cards. And it's like, oh, it's my money. It's like, it's not your money.
Well, the thing you could flag, not necessarily maxing out a credit card, is applying for new credit cards. People with spending addictions almost always will go down a slippery slope of getting more and more credit cards, and then they run out of the ability, and then they start taking credit cards in other people's names. Yeah. So you could absolutely have a measure in place that could account for that. And, you probably wouldn't find a lot of people that would oppose that. But as you are saying, is the capitalist system has zero incentive to do that.
And I guess that's my meta point, is that like it feels like as long as we can make money from an individual, they might have to kill themselves. And that sucks. And so like going back to the video game thing, there's totally ways that video game companies could put limits. It doesn't have to be a law. They could just do it. And then if all of them did it, the person would have to write their own video game to be addicted to, and then they're the only one playing it. So,
well, it wouldn't eliminate the problem. It would.
Nope.
It wouldn't. But it'd be a little damage. It'd be a little help, and it would be a little assistance. Yeah, absolutely. That I would stand behind, unless I just bought the new Baldur's Gate 3 and I'm playing it for 13 hours. I would throw my computer out the window.
But you don't have a pattern of doing that for years at a time.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, then I'm in the clear. All right, Berto. Okay. Well, we solved addiction, and everyone out there, please take care of yourself, and you're welcome for us solving addiction. And again, take care of yourself because
you deserve it.